During World War II, engineers studied planes that came back from combat riddled with bullet holes, and they wanted to know where to add armor. The obvious answer? Reinforce the spots covered in holes. One statistician said no, reinforce everywhere else, because the planes that got hit there never made it back to be studied. That's survivorship bias. And it turns out your muscles are running the exact same trick on you right now as you age. Here's the story most of us have in our heads about why muscle heals slower as we get older. The cells just wear out. Repeated damage, less repair capacity, decline sets in, simple as that. Old muscle is just tired muscle. That's the assumption baked into how we talk about aging in general. Less capable, across the board, uniformly worse. It's why aging equals decline gets treated as a law of nature instead of a pattern that might have exceptions. But a team at UCLA went looking for the actual mechanism behind that slowdown. Not a vague story about wear and tear, but the specific molecular reason old muscle stem cells hesitate before jumping into repair mode. And what they found doesn't fit the just worn-out story at all. Researchers compared muscle stem cells taken from young mice and old mice and found one protein that stood out immediately, a molecule called NDRG1. In the oldest cells, NDRG1 levels were 3.5 times higher than in the young ones. NDRG1 acts like a brake. It suppresses a pathway called mTOR, the signal that normally tells a stem cell to activate, grow, start repairing. High NDRG1 means the brake stays pressed, so aged muscle stem cells are slower to wake up after an injury. That's the actual reason healing takes longer with age. One specific protein, holding the door shut. So the researchers tried the obvious next experiment. They aged mice up to the equivalent of about 75 human years, then blocked NDRG1's activity directly in the muscle stem cells. And it worked, immediately. The aged cells woke up fast, activated like young cells, and repaired injured muscle noticeably quicker. For a moment, that looks like the story is over. Found the brake, released the brake, problem solved. Except the researchers kept watching, and over time, with the brake removed, fewer of those stem cells survived. Repeated injury wore the population down faster. The same fix that made old muscle act young again. This is where it stops being a story about a slow protein and starts being a story about survivorship bias, the actual, literal kind, happening inside your body. Over a lifetime, muscle stem cells that don't build up enough NDRG1 don't get old and slow. They die off. What's left in an aged muscle isn't the best cells that also got old, it's the cells that happen to be cautious enough to survive, at the cost of being fast. The researchers even have a name for it. Cellular survivorship bias. The population of stem cells you'd measure in an 80-year-old isn't a fair sample of how stem cells age. It's a filtered sample, the risk-averse ones, the ones that traded speed for staying alive. And this reframes the fix from the last experiment. Blocking NDRG1 didn't repair aging. It just temporarily removed the trait that let those particular cells survive aging in the first place. Undo the caution, and you get speed back. For a while, until the population that depended on that caution starts to shrink. Researchers note this looks a lot like trade-offs seen elsewhere in nature. Organisms under stress, drought, extreme cold often shift resources away from growth and reproduction and toward pure survival. Aging muscle stem cells may be running a version of that same program, just at the cellular level. So what's actually going on here? It's not that old muscle is simply worn out, and it's not that we've found a clean fix by removing one protein. It's that aging muscle is a survivor population, shaped by which cells were cautious enough to still be there to measure. The headline isn't "Scientists found the aging switch." It's that some of what looks like decline might actually be a filtered outcome. The traits we're calling old and slow could be the same traits that kept those specific cells alive long enough to be old at all. And that changes what fixing aging should even mean. Removing the brake without understanding why it evolved isn't repair. It's a trade you might not be prepared to make. If that changes how you think about what old and slow actually means at a cellular level, that's exactly the kind of finding worth sitting with. This channel exists to find results like this, ones that quietly rewrite what we assumed was simple decline. So if that's useful to you, subscribing means you catch the next one. And speaking of things that aren't what they first appear to be, there's a discovery in the cerebellum, the brain's movement center, that's overturning an assumption researchers have held for decades about how two of its core cell types actually work together. That one might be next.